And I think this is all part of Islam as well. I think there tends to be a view that, the theories there about Islam, as long as you've got the right ideas, and Dr. Kaleem was very much like that, but he acknowledged he didn't have that experience of doing the practical things, which is why he appointed me as his deputy. But, that in itself doesn't bring the change necessary. You still have to do the practical stuff in terms of building unity. I think you can talk about unity, and most of us do. We pay lip service, but the practical elements of unity is what really needs to be thought about, and understanding what creates disunity.
Assalamu alaikum, guys, and welcome to today's Unscripted podcast. It's been a few weeks. I've been out cold with COVID, actually. Alhamdulillah, I'm fully recovered, alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah. I'm back to my 110%. We like to turn things up to 11 at Psalm 21C. I was out with COVID for a while. That sofa was over there was my bed. I was banished to this place, but alhamdulillah, everyone's fine now and recovered, alhamdulillah. Thank you for your du'as. Anyone who knew about that, I'm very grateful for all of you brothers and sisters remembering us in your du'as. So we're back now. Alhamdulillah, hit the ground running with some fresh COVID antibodies. You should have seen the state of the COVID that I left it in, subhanAllah. We've got a very good podcast for you today. I've been meaning to get today's guest for many months, ever since we started, because he's a very interesting person. He's got a lot of history and experience in the Islamic dawah and activism scene and political scene, in particular in the UK. His name is Jahangir Mohammed, and since we been waiting to have him on, he's gone and started a think tank, mashallah, tabarakallah, the Ayan Institute. So we'll be talking about that as well as his history and some lessons from him and reflections from him. Just before we jump into it, please do remember to click the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so that you get to the front of the queue whenever we bring this juicy stuff out. And remember to like and share this with your friends if you benefit from it. Let us know in the comments. I think more interactions can't hurt the travel of this video if you're watching it on YouTube or whatever. And also please consider donating. It's let's try and get 250 people from this video to donate £5 a month to help support Unscripted and Islam Fluency in general going. £5 a month, very easy, only 16p a day. You can do it. So remember to sit back, go and grab yourself a cup of tea or some popcorn and enjoy. Assalamu alaikum, Jahangir.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakallah khair for joining us. Alhamdulillah, I'm well. I mean, Jahangir, we've been meaning to get you on for a while, and you, in that time, you've gone and started a think tank, so we had to talk about that, right? But I have been meaning to have you on before that news anyway. So, I mean, your biography, and I've heard people say this about you, that you've been researching Islamic and jihad movements since for 28 years or something, mashallah. And I was thinking that's around about the time I was analyzing Sesame Street or something. So I was obviously a youth back then. So I wanted to get you, and I like to get brothers who have experience on the dawah scene or activism scene to pick their brains and learn from their experiences and stuff. So I guess, can you just tell us about yourself? I mean, some people might not know about you and your checkered history, if I could say that. But I mean, you're involved with, all I know is you were involved with Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui, a celebrated Muslim kind of political scientist who had some, ideas that I see now as, beyond his era, beyond his time. MashaAllah, rahimahullah, Allah have mercy on him. You were involved in something called a Muslim Parliament. You've been involved in a local government, local councils, and stuff. But I don't know, like, how do you explain your trajectory, your history?
Well, my trajectory really is that I've always been interested in the social side of humanity, as it were. And I remember when I was doing my A levels, I started off in science, and we had this. Science teachers were all male. I went into the A level classes for about a week, and they were talking all this scientific jargon and whatever, and I just, they seemed to be in a different world, and I just realized it wasn't me. I'm not, my parents wanted me to do science and stuff, but like all Asian parents, just wasn't me. So I walked out and I changed to social sciences. I always had this thirst for finding the right ideology or policy, social problems. It was always what interested me. And I guess that's what I went into in terms of sociology, with a focus on social policy. And got a job at a very young age as a lecturer at what is now De Montfort University, in social policy and public admin. And did that for 3 years. Enjoyed it, taught a lot of topics around British social policy, development of British social policy, local government, decentralisation. But I was really still in the thirst for the ideal way of life, or system that gives you the right policies. And
were you practicing back then?
Sorry?
Were you practicing back then?
I think I've always been practicing in the sense that, my mother taught me Islam. And she taught me Islam from a point of view of knowledge. In fact, the small town where we lived, there was no mosque where we were brought up. Our house was the masjid. My mother was a teacher. She taught all the children in the local town the Quran and the basis of the deen, and she was a very knowledgeable person. In fact, when the first masjid was opened, the imam was from one school of thought and the chairman was from another, and they would often argue and dispute, and they would come to her.
Muslims arguing? Are you sure?
So they would come to her to resolve the issues, and she would do that on the basis of deen. So I had that background. But yeah, I think in terms of practicing, it was what I was. Sometimes I describe it as you have the glasses on your nose, but you're searching for them. and I think I was, looking at Marxism and all these other ideologies, and I thought, it's fantastic. Find this.
From a kind of social perspective, you're looking at.
Yeah. I didn't see Islam from that perspective. I was looking at other ways, and it dawned on me really when I got late into my degree. I realized I started reading Islamic books, and I realized that actually the glasses were on my nose already. And what was really required was for me to put the whole thing, all the knowledge that I was learning, back within an Islamic framework, and that was really my love of policy. As I say, I was a young lecturer, surrounded by other promising lecturers from the non-Muslim world who were into decentralization, local government. And at some point I realized that this was not really, this was theoretical. And it was theoretical, and I needed to be in at the practical level, because the practice is very different from theory. Theory gives you a framework of understanding practically local government and solving policy problems on the ground is very different. And at that time, I also developed an interest in think tanks, by the way. I spent a lot of time going to Covent Garden in London and seeing the rise of the new think tanks during the Thatcher era, Institute of Economic Affairs, Adam Smith Institute, and a lot of others. And, a shift started happening in think tanks around that time. They became less academic and more about framing ideas and thoughts and policies and influencing government and others. So I got interested in that, really, and it's always been an ambition to develop a proper think tank, but nobody really has been interested in that a lot of the time. So I just did what I needed to do with other friends and colleagues. The Muslim Parliament, I joined that when Dr. Kaleem came around because that had elements of what I was already interested in, and it was the practical policy side, particularly in the UK, that I was really interested in, and started to develop that.
So for someone who doesn't know what the Muslim Parliament is and might get kind of some funny ideas in their head, what would you explain it as? How do you describe it?
Well, when I first heard Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui talk, I went to a talk he did in Manchester, and I had the very same idea. So what's this parliament he's talking about? But actually, it was his ishtihad, basically, that you have to have the Islamic development and way of life. You have to have a political system of Islam, even in a minority situation. You have to have leadership. Even if you are, three on a journey, you have to choose one as your Amir. How can you have 3 million Muslims and not have a system of leadership or a political entity to pursue the goals of Islam? And I think what he had come round to was the view that if you can't establish the whole of the system of Islam, you still have to have the core elements of leadership, pursuit of the goals of Islam, forbidding evil and enjoining the right. So you still have to do those things. So you create as much as you can of that system. And the parliament, it was effectively the Majlis al-Shura al-Islami fi Britannia. So it was the idea of Majlis al-Shura to bring different people together to discuss their problems and come up with resolutions and guide the community. It was a system of leadership, really, for an independent community development, and to also face the threats and challenges. And as you say, I think he was way ahead of his time. Not many people understood it back then, although he had a lot of support in places like South Africa and outside of Britain, possibly than he did in Britain. But as things have developed, I get lots of youngsters and people writing PhDs and even universities. I believe Professor Robert Gleaves, teaches
Exeter.
Dr. Kaleem's thought at Exeter University as well. So more people have become interested in his ideas and thoughts now than they probably were back in the day.
That tends to happen a lot with people historically.
Yeah. So it was a man way ahead of his times, and I think if we look at our situation now, I think
even these podcasts, I always say a lot of people are gonna start watching them after I've died.
Yeah. So. Well, learning is like that, isn't it? And
what happened to it?
Into contact with people, Islamic movements all around the world. Bosnia broke out at the time. We were heavily involved in that. And with the Bosnian government, there was a world conference on Bosnia here in London that the Parliament had organised, which basically had put the right of self-defense of the Bosnian Muslims and exposed the genocide at that time. The halal meat industry regulation was thought about at that time and started, although it went pear-shaped later. It was a system following the Jewish model where halal meat would be regulated and create so many jobs. And also there was one element of it which was not publicly spoken about, but it was the idea that this would be the finance system of the Muslim community. So if you needed to fund, say, a education system for Muslims, you would put 1p on the price of the halal tagged meat, and that would give you an income of millions to develop your system. So the ideas were way ahead of me. I'm hearing people talking about that now. But that was actually the plan.
I'm sorry to butt in, guys, but just a reminder to subscribe if you haven't already. If you like this content, tap the bell icon as well, will you? And leave this podcast a like and a share if you find benefit. If you don't like it, tap the dislike button twice. So what happened to it?
I think what happened to it was, when you bring a platform of unity with different people, different groups, with their own groupism together to create a system of unity, it inevitably causes tensions and problems. And really, the ideas were great. I was trying to put the nuts and bolts, tidy it up, create a constitution, and do all the groundwork needed to make that system secure. Unfortunately, Dr. Kaleem passed away in 1997, and he wasn't able to do that. He wasn't able to pass a lot of the control that I needed to be able to make that happen. After it wasn't totally independent, it was linked to the Muslim Institute. We hadn't developed an independent base, which he'd asked me to do before he passed away, to make the parliament totally independent. And when he passed away, I was actually elected the leader of the Muslim parliament. There was a small faction that felt that one of his long-term companions was wiser. I was still very young, and that he should take over as it happened. So I was interested not in the leadership, but more in doing the work. So I basically said, okay, he can let him symbolically become the leader for 3 years. After that, I will take over, and then in that time I can focus on the things that needed to be done. Unfortunately, conflict broke out between various factions over whatever assets there were or whatever typical scenario, I didn't really have much control over any of the things, even the bank accounts, to be able to do what I needed to do, really, in effect.
Nope.
And by the end of the 3 years, the person who claimed to be the leader effectively said he'd kicked everybody out and he was the leader, and even continued to portray himself as the leader, even though there wasn't, in effect, a membership anymore.
I mean, one of the things that you do, as part of your kind of professional work, is you help organizations, charities, mosques and so forth with their governance and maybe problems that they have. So what you've just described sounds like a typical kind of mosque.
It's a typical scenario, and I actually learned a lot from that. In fact, one of the things that you learn is that, unfortunately, when these things happen, some of our elders in particular, but even youngsters, the level of fighting and manipulation and spinning the facts and even lying, and it becomes so desperate that sometimes I have to remind them that we are Muslims and we're supposed to follow a certain pattern of conduct. But it has helped me. Had I been more experienced then, I probably would have been able to handle it a bit better. But the key thing is the people who in control usually hold the cards. And unless there is, it's interesting, the Muslim Institute, which Dr. Kaleem Sadiq had created, it was in conflict, and even the Charity Commission couldn't resolve the conflict for about 10 years. So 10 years after he's passed away, the Charity Commission is still trying to sort these issues out, and eventually they basically split the assets and the people.
I mean, you're right. We are Muslims, and we should be held to or expect a greater standard of community and camaraderie and so forth, but we're also human beings. I was going to say unfortunately, but we are human beings. And
human beings have egos.
Yeah.
They have, one of the things, unfortunately, we haven't learned is that, look, people also need to make a living, and sometimes we'll fight like anything to preserve their livelihood and their means of income. And you have to factor that in terms of developing organizations and dealing with it in a certain way. If you look at the Houses of Parliament, they, when the MPs retire or whatever, instead of just getting rid of them, in many cases they basically ping them to the upper house.
House of Lords, yeah.
House of Lords. So they find a way of keeping people involved, and so they don't become a political problem in essence, which is what they're doing, which is a sign of political maturity. What we tend to do is we tend to fight like cat and dog and basically bring the house down, instead of building and thinking of the wider interests. And
so people like you have learned these lessons through the college of life experience. Do you think how do you, is Ayan Institute, for example, one example of how you're trying to feed that back into practical policy in terms of how to deal with our human nature as well as, get somewhere in life?
Yeah, I think obviously I do it in my day-to-day work, as my emphasis is bringing solutions to a lot of the charities and organizations that I work with, but also building them for the long term, and bringing a younger generation who understands those issues, and make sure we don't fall in those same traps as we have.
Because it's easy to give a lecture about unity and everyone's one ummah, and you're worshipping the same Allah, and you have the same Prophet, Sallallahu have the same book. But practically speaking, people need that, how to implement that in our daily, in our mosque committee, in our Islamic society, in our organization at work, and even in the home, how to deal with people with different opinions. And we can't just, appeal to theoretical or general nusus, of Islamic texts and so forth. We have to learn to deal with different personalities, different agendas.
Yeah, and I think this is all part of Islam as well. I think there tends to be a view that, the theories there about Islam, as long as you've got the right ideas, and Dr. Kaleem was very much like that, but he acknowledged he didn't have that experience of doing the practical things, which is why he appointed me as his deputy. But that in itself doesn't bring the change necessary. You still have to do the practical stuff in terms of building unity. I think you can talk about unity, and most of us do. We pay lip service, but the practical elements of unity is what really needs to be thought about, and understanding what creates disunity. And even simple things like being dependent on overseas states for your funding. That also affects the behavior of Muslim organizations into what they can do, what they can't do.
I did want to ask you about that in particular, but before we get on to that, what would you do differently if you started Muslim Parliament today again, or would you? Do you think actually it wouldn't work? Or
well, I think in a way what Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui did, he was way ahead of everybody else, and he basically dragged people. It was a top-down approach. He dragged people who shared similar ideas, or in many cases who supported him, and he brought them together. It was mainly a more elderly and intelligent group of people. It wasn't grassroots based. It didn't come from the ground upwards, where you create that understanding. So that was always a weakness. I mean, he was a leader. He took up leadership, and he pushed people in a direction that really people weren't ready to go down. I think the experience we've had over the last 20, 30 years, there's more young people, people like yourself, many others that I've met, and who are grassroots, who are doing work on the ground, who have a better understanding of these issues. We talk about them, we discuss them, and now we also realize there are more people who realize that you need independent community organization and leadership to pursue the goals and even tackle some of our problems that we're facing. So I think the moment is right on the ground for something like that now. But also I learned a key element that actually you have to have control of the nuts and bolts as well, and it has to be in the right hands. And I mean, he knew that, but he wasn't able to do that. I had an office in Manchester. He wasn't able to transfer a lot of those things to me. I wasn't prepared to move to London. So that didn't happen. Unfortunately, we had a lot of discussion in South Africa. There was still factionalism, so there's groupism. What you get is, whenever you bring different people together, they will still pursue their own group loyalties and interests rather than they will take what you suggest and bring it into their own group rather than putting their energy into one group and say, no, this is important, we need to build and go in this direction. And you have to manage all those things. I mean, it was challenging, it was nice. Sometimes it was tough. You've got people with different schools of thought, with different racial backgrounds, and they all look at the problem from a different perspective. So hearing all those views and coming to a common solution or creating a common resolution itself was quite challenging. But I think, now I think the Muslim community is probably more ready and to build it from the ground upwards rather than...
Is it something you have on your bucket list to do before you die? Resurrect the Muslim
Parliament? I think the think tank is about creating that consciousness and pushing people to do it. I mean, we're not going to do everything, but some members of the Ayan Institute, people like Yahya Burt, have more interest in that direction in terms of bringing a unified approach, not just in the UK, but also minorities elsewhere. And, it's something I've discussed with Sheikh Haytham as well. I mean, he's interested in those type of issues about the organisation of Muslims as minorities.
Speaking of Ayan Institute, so I was just reading your report It describes itself as working towards creating a unified, independent, powerful, and prosperous Muslim world that can help establish Islam as a solution to humanity's problems. Is that all?
Yeah, that's the big dream.
Yeah, mashallah.
As I say, you have to dream big. You have to imagine the world as you want it to be, and then you start at the point as it is, and you take it from there, which is what we've also tried to do in the report. And we've basically said, look, this is the dream, this is the vision. It's rooted in Islam, in the Quran, and in our history, and we recognise that it could take a very long time. But here are the things that we need to focus on. We've identified 12 factors that can help create unity. Unification is the word we use, rather than unity, because unity is an end goal. Unification is a process that helps you to get to that goal. And what we're saying is that we look at the Muslim world now. It's we can't even defend human life anymore. Yeah. We can't even protect people from genocide. We've got 53 nation states and 1.8 billion people, and basically we're not even in a position to. We've got 37 million refugees, mostly Muslims, in the last 20 years. We're almost powerless to do anything. And on top of that, you've got underdevelopment, illiteracy, and many other problems in the Muslim world. And we have to do better, and we have to lift ourselves out of that situation.
One thing that made me laugh, though, in the report, at the beginning, you said, you part of your research, your extensive research, was messenger groups, where chatting with different people on messenger groups and stuff, and you said often without them knowing.
Yeah,
I thought, have you been spying on us and like creating some dossier about whatever?
Well, a lot of messenger groups. People spend a lot of time discussing. Yeah. I like to think that you can use those.
Yeah,
and sometimes I deliberately throw in provocative comments or thoughts or stir people up to get a reaction, and they don't. You do learn things from that as well. How people are thinking, what stage people are at, how groupism works. I like to use things. People may think I'm engaging for no purpose, but there's always
a notepad next to your phone there. Welcome, guys. Me again. Sorry to disturb, but just quickly subscribe if you haven't already, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, and we'll be on our way. So, the report raises many very important issues and offers a roadmap, and I want us to obviously we'll put the link to the report in the description and stuff, and we want to encourage people to read it. It's very gripping read. A few things, I'll just kind of jotted down a few things I wanted to maybe probe you about in more detail. You mentioned disunity, infighting, you mentioned the issue of foreign funding, for example, foreign states funding Islamic activism and dawah. Obviously don't mention names if you don't want to, but what is the impact? What has the impact been, and what can the impact be of foreign states on dawah and activism here in the UK?
Well, I think often the funders have a political agenda as well as a commitment to Islam, if they have that. So sometimes you get nationalism with it, sometimes you get a religious nationalism, sometimes you get an ethno-nationalism, even in dawah. I think one of the predominant, if you write a bid for dawah to some of the Middle East states, the principle that you get is, the Mongols were took over the world of Islam, and basically they eventually became Muslims. So you get this idea that your enemies can become Muslims as well, and therefore all your focus is on converting people and a kind of passive kind of dawah, which is based on one history of the Muslim world, rather than going back to the seerah and looking at how prophetic dawah worked, and maybe other models, in the Far East, for example, where trade was used. Traders basically brought people to Islam. So I think with state funding, the ideology of the state, the politics of the state always comes with that. I know people might disagree, but also you're not going to challenge the rulers of that state, and sometimes Islam may require you to challenge what's going on.
Like a soft secularism, maybe, where they say focus on dawah to the grassroots, but don't talk about political issues, don't talk about global issues. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and a process of change, which basically is a theology of pacifism and
obedience of the rulers.
And also some of the relationships they have with non-Muslim states. For example, a lot of the Council of Mosques, like in France and elsewhere, that have been created not just with the help of the host of the indigenous state, but some of those foreign states have been working hand in hand with those states to create some of these
former colonies.
Yeah, and they are still doing that. In essence, they're still some of the states in the Middle East are still influencing the governments here to try and produce laws which impact the Muslims in this country, not rooted in the traditions of this country in a lot of cases, but which have the net effect of silencing Muslim voices and a particular form of Islam.
Yeah. I mean, you get the impression sometimes that Muslims in certain Western countries are being used as kind of guinea pigs sometimes to test out more and more kind of like CVE-based policies, countering extremism-based policies, and there's kind of ripples and effects across the world. And you'd see that some regimes would have a vested interest in quelling that like maybe a revolutionary fervor, or people just ask for their own rights or elections.
Well, not only that, if you look at the way CVE is developing in outside of Britain, you have an interesting trend, which is basically not just the silencing of dissent, but we've been, since the report was launched, we've spoken to some academics in different universities in the Muslim world, and they, one of them said, well, we don't look to us for freedom of thought and expression and producing challenging stuff, because we're not free. So CVE is being used, particularly it's being exported in the Muslim world, not just in terms of silencing political dissent, but it's basically silencing debate, discussion, creation of thought. So you have a weird situation where Islamic civilization in the past was built on knowledge and engagement and discussion and freedom to debate, discuss, produce new works. Actually, what we're getting is we now have regimes in the Muslim world which are basically committed to destroying that very freedom and stopping Muslims from challenging, debating nationalism, debating the modern ideas and producing an Islamic viewpoint on that.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, if I were to, I don't like doing this, but if I were to say look at one thing for us to focus on, that would have the maximum impact on our conduct locally, globally, whatever. I think pretty much high up there would be there's a book on it, Manhajiyat Ta'amul Ma'al Mukhalif, and how to deal with people you disagree with, because I think that is at the crux of it. One way is to violently suppress them if you have the power, right? And that's kind of the common thread from the mosque politics to the the different groups infighting to on a state level, certain people petitioning powers to take out their rival group or suppress them. Or one thing that you mentioned in the report was quite interesting. You mentioned one of the problems we suffer from is the stagnation of Muslim groups and thinking, that the ideals of the founders of those groups are still kind of being are still faithfully held, but the context has radically changed since then. And obviously it sounds very coherent and a logical argument to put maybe rethink your group identity and your values as a group or organization and see what's needed now. But what did you have in mind when you were talking about that, or when you mentioned that? It was a kind of an interesting kind of throwaway comment, but I want to probe you a bit more on that.
The world changes. Conditions change, experiences change. Things that the theories that you had, obviously I'm not talking about the fundamentals of Islam. I'm talking here about people's opinions on a problem or on a solution, and how you reflect on the world. That changes all the time, and people have to move with that. Even if you even from Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui's time, the world has changed fundamentally.
Even like a kind of founders of big groups and jama'at, even during their own lifetimes, many of them, they had changes of opinion and so forth. I think that's a key thing when you're talking about dealing with people you disagree with, and that is putting your group's objectives not aside, but seeing where you can align and in certain things with the rest of the ummah. Everyone, you still need people to focus on A, B, C, D, because there's millions of problems and issues out there. But the key is kind of, I think, bringing that common denominator, to all of these the groups.
Yeah, and I think even simple things. I mean, I've looked at if you look at some of the constitutions of some of the groups that came out, during the era of the rise of communism. Some of those constitutions actually reflect that period. In fact, I've seen some in some of the movements myself, and my initial thought was actually this looks like a communist party structure or constitution, and it might have been appropriate at the time. That's how you organize. That's how, but the world has changed. Governance ideas about governance, ideas about control have changed. Even during the end of the Ottoman period, the Ottoman Caliphate, when it ended, there were only 15 million people under its rule. Today,
I was surprised when you mentioned that, and the thing that the Muslim
today
ummah,
we have 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, and a quarter of humanity. How do you practically organize a group of people like that? We have more people in Pakistan and Bangladesh than the Ottoman state had under its control. So inevitably, that requires new ways of thinking, new ideas. The world's social problems have changed. Forms of racism have changed. Even forms of asabiya have changed. You can look at party politics, how that divides people.
Yeah.
You can look at other issues. So it's not exactly as it was. We can't just take a blueprint and stamp it on. We have to, rethink that. And the Quran is also unfolding guidance. It has to be, because the world changes. So you have to constantly go back and reflect. Part of the Quran does provide you people from different times, era, to come up with new insights and new wisdom.
Yeah. We have this, we have these notions of, certain things are thawabit, that they unchanging, tawheed, there's certain beliefs of the Muslims, for example, supremacy of Sharia generally as a whole. But some things are, they change, or they're based on effective causal rulings that are linked to, changing circumstances. Some call them mutaghayyirat. So, how you structure a country, your economic policy, your social policies that you used to lecture about, it is problematic to take something historical and read into it that it's normative, i.e. that you have to replicate that. Certain things are, certain things are that you have to, these are core issues, like, riba, for example. You can't have that in your, or you have to rather move towards eradicating that in your economies. But other things, and this is a deeply scholarly thing that requires scholars to think about these big issues. But one of the problems, Sheikh Haytham mentioned this in a meeting recently, that scholars have to be criticized in a nice way, because he mentioned a story that two big scholars met, from different rival groups, 100 years ago or so. And, the conversation that they had was about Raf'ul Yadayn. Do you raise your hands in the prayer? And he said it's embarrassing and it's very bad that these big scholars at the time of the destruction of the Khilafah, or just about that time, this was a conversation they were having. Many scholars, they like to stay in the comfort zone, because these things have been debated, and not that, obviously praying, it's not praying, it's the differences and disagreements you have in the prayer about praying, and it's something that requires organize think tanks like yourselves to get the scholars around the table, and the key influential and authoritative scholars in the world today to hash out these things. Where are the boundaries and how do they change and so forth, and it's extremely important.
Even things like, it's easy to say, unity and disunity, but to understand how to become united, you have to understand and look at how we are disunited. You have to understand what disunity means, and then apply the Islamic concepts and principles to that, because that has changed. It's changed in a massive way. The very fact that Muslims, even as a minority, used to be very powerful. We were even when we were in a minority, we were ruling minorities. Today we've got, I think 1/3 of the Muslim world live as minorities. Muslim population. What does that mean? How do they survive? We've seen genocide in Bosnia. How do they coexist? How do they relate to the wider Muslim world? What kind of rulings and on issues to do with local matters? How do we structure that? How do we organize that?
There's no such thing as a local fatwa anymore. Because the moment someone puts it online, social media, everything kind of there's no more borders in that regard, and no authority for local scholars to address local issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that we need to consider is that actually, again, physically you might live within a border, but intellectually, mentally, socially, you can exist outside a border. The modern world has given you that. What implication does that have for Islamic movements?
Yeah. I mean,
Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui used to talk about that in terms of ideas of having Muslim organization outside of a state structure.
Yeah.
So these are all. I mean, now he's passed away in 20 years. It's phenomenal, the changes that you've got. You can have Zoom meetings with people all around the world now. You can have conferences. You don't need to move out away from your desk to have a conference. You can have huge conferences sitting at home.
Yeah.
So,
guys, just a quick reminder, final one I promise, inshallah. Please help us continue Islam 20 Unscripted by donating, inshallah, £5 a month if you can. Let us know in the comments if you've done that, and help us by spreading the word as well. I was keeping like a mental running list of all of the things, like you mentioned, that we are very different now. The world's very different now compared to, this is Rajab now. We're in Rajab. It's 100 Hijri years since the official demise of the Ottoman Khilafah, right? So how is I'm keeping a running kind of list of the things you're saying. How are we different? How's the world different today compared to then, right? So you've mentioned, the things that so many things you mentioned. Just to recap, the Muslim Ummah is much larger. Okay, that's number one. Practically speaking, how do you govern such a huge? That has to be considered. The Muslim Ummah has new causes for disunity and kind of tribalism. The party politics is a very interesting one. I didn't think about that. But some of these things, I'm wondering, how are we? Some differences, do we have them on our radar, such as technology, in terms of the power? Like, who are the most powerful entity? Where does power reside now? Is it in the state anymore, or is power now in Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook? Right, that's where a lot of power is concentrating now in our new kind of economy. Some would kind of left-wing thinkers would call surveillance capitalism now, in terms of mining human beings for data, the economy being based on the predictability of future human behavior, all the way from, what kind of ads pop up in your browser, to your whole search history and what things you're scrolling on online and that kind of stuff. Maybe even watching this, if we mention something, and then that's data. So are we whenever I speak to someone or read something about a future of Muslims, right? You mentioned, imagine the world as you want to see it, right? Are we considering what the world is going to be like based on this trajectory now, ignoring the Muslim bit, just what the world is, the way power operates in the world? What are we looking at now in the last 20, 30 years, how power has behaved, and trying to replicate that? So by the time we get there, there'll be robots running the place or something completely different. Is this? Have you got this on the radar? Are you thinking about this? How are some people thinking about this? In terms of how will power change? Maybe we work to, for example, establish all the Muslim states are united now, for example, in 50 years. But by that time, states don't have any power anymore. Maybe.
Yeah. And that's a very valid point that you made. But the way the report's structured, it's taken a year of thought, and virtually every paragraph, there's a lot invested and thinking behind it. And there is a section on beyond the borders of the nation state, and we now have multi-billion-pound corporations who have more power and wealth than many states. So those are realities. And what we're saying in this report, and what we want to do in the think tank, is say, look, let's start thinking and discussing these things. How does power look in the future? How do Muslims generate that power? How do they organize around that? It's very, sometimes I hear youngsters talking about, let's get rid of this government and that government, overthrow this one, that one. And, I sit there thinking, we can't even overthrow the local masjid elders, aged elders on a committee. We can't even take over that, and we're talking about taking over nuclear powers. So I think we need to be grounded in a bit more reality, and it's a duty for the elders and for the intellectuals to bring people to that level. We want to stimulate that debate. I think we have so many more youngsters now around the world who are intellectuals, who are people who are thinkers, writers. We need to bring them together to study some of these problems, and some of it requires research. The problems.
So what is, at the moment, what is the vision? What is the world that you want to see? What does success look like for you?
Well, I think this success obviously looks like, first and foremost, as a Muslim and as Islamic activists, the basis of Islam, as I said in the inauguration speeches, we're talking about creating a new civilization of Islam. And that civilization of Islam has to be rooted in divine guidance. The difference between us and the West, and that's not a polarization, it's a genuine difference, is that we fundamentally believe that in the testimony of faith, the Shahada, the Tawheed, as you said, we are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we submit to Allah's will and to His guidance. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last messenger of Allah. That is the basis of our political thought, as well as our personal aqidah and belief. It should be at the center of what we do, and it was at the center of Islamic civilization. The Western civilization believes that man emerged at some point in history. We don't know where from, and that somehow all the knowledge in the world, man has created it. Whereas the Muslim approach is fundamentally different. We believe that the first human being was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was endowed with knowledge. He was given guidance. And 124,000 prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. They all were sent to guide mankind. So knowledge from an Islamic point of view is rooted in divine guidance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just create man and leave them to their own devices. He gave them some guidance to go along with that. And that at the core, it was Islamic civilization was built on that. All the knowledge that we created basically was rooted in that thought. So I think we have to create a civilization or understand the world's problems and create whatever we are trying to create, a Muslim world that is united, prosperous, works together, brings those 1.8 billion people together to realize the goals of Islam, essentially, and to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The world is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's. He's not just in the heavens. He owns the earth. He is to use a sentiment that everybody can understand. He's the landlord and we are the tenants. And the tenants have to live according to the rules of the landlord. Otherwise, if you don't follow those rules, there'll be chaos and disorder. And fundamentally, we are believers in that school of thought.
So, what is your? So you want to create a new civilization of Islam. What is your view then of the role / continued existence of Muslims in, for example, the UK, who live as minorities? You're saying a third of us Muslims live as minorities. What is your view of the future of Muslims as minorities?
Well, I think it's going to be a challenging one because what we see right now is that Muslims as minorities are being targeted everywhere. Whether it's India, which you have a huge minority, Muslims are a huge minority in the UK, and the world is going in the opposite direction in the sense that it believes that. As the French have tried to impose on the Muslims, that belief in the man as superior to God. And they want Muslims to accept that. So this is going to be a challenging time. I mean, the fact that we have our own political beliefs doesn't mean we can't coexist. We've always coexisted, even going back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the onus is on us to organize. You can't organize around the Labour Party or the Tory Party. There has to be an independently organized Muslim community, powerful Muslim community that is working towards the goals of Islam. Because ultimately, that is what we have to convey to the wider society, and we have to help them as well to basically find solutions to their problems. So I think if you think the problems are only with us, I think we can see from the United States and France and even the United Kingdom, they've got quite a few problems themselves. Macron said Islam is in crisis. You look around the world, democracy is in crisis everywhere. We have mob rule effectively in a lot of countries. People who can whip up the most hatred against a group are in power and using that power. So how do we, as Muslims, challenge that? Well, the only way we can effectively challenge that is by being organized, having leadership, creating the institutions of unity, of education, a whole infrastructure around us that can protect us from that, but also relate to the masses, because we have to have a relationship with the wider segment. If we rely on the media and the politicians to do that work and to continue to paint us as demons, then we're not going to have a good time. But on the ground, the people of this country, I believe fundamentally in they are not opposed to Muslims and Islam. They are as much a victim of the propaganda as the rest of us. So we have to basically have that kind of relationship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran that He created us from one man and one woman and divided us into tribes and nations. So this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed the world with, people of different colors, shapes, identities, and so that we can know each other. How do we know each other? I mean, that's something we touch on in the report. that doesn't just extend to ourselves, it extends to the rest of humanity. And also a lot of Muslims have started doing some good work now since the COVID. We need to take that to another level, but all of these things depend on Muslims being able to organize themselves effectively as a community, with the right institutions, with the right leadership, independent from the political system and the political leadership. I'm not saying people shouldn't do all that. That's up to, people are already doing that. They've been doing that for centuries, but we must be organized ourselves as a community of believers, which is the requirement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So we've moved full circle to Muslim Parliament 2.0.
Yeah, well, the Muslim Parliament was a reflection trying to create that leadership. How do we, again, I'm not seeking to reproduce it, but that's a legitimate question. And a lot of people are asking that. How do we recreate those institutions of unity?
How do we do our own politics?
It's a discussion to be had. I'm not imposing anything. It needs to come from the people themselves. The scholars need to debate it. The movements need to debate it. It's not. That was Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui's particular thought process. Maybe that we do things differently now. I mean, just holding a parliament session used to take months of work. You can now organize it on Zoom. It's amazing how the world has changed. And I think, but it's an important discussion because there's a real challenge ahead for the Muslim community. If we don't address these issues in the next few years, I think we will possibly in the UK end up in the French situation quicker than we imagine. And we have to deal with the fact that we now live in a society, again, this hasn't been the case in the past. For the first time, the majority of this country don't believe in God or don't ascribe to a higher power. How do we deal with people who don't have such beliefs? And the system that we have is now based on that. In the past, there was scope for religion, for difference. We're now moving to an era where people who believe man is superior in all ways, and secularism is, a belief system. I call it the rise of secular religion. How do we cope with secular religion? And some of it is, there are different shades. You might have the UK shade. You might have the French shade, which is very extreme and intolerant. How do we deal with all these?
Yes, man. I mean, there's a lot to be said about secularism. I don't want to kind of open up a can of worms now, but I mean, I'm conscious of the time. Jazakallah khair for giving us your time. Just quickly going over the action plan that you suggest, right, in the report. So working on trade, travel and economy, unification through alliances, associations, knowledge and learning beyond boundaries, focusing on media and culture, intra-faith rather than more than interfaith, self-defense and protection, charity and community development. So these 7 points are like your action plan that you're, it's very interesting reading through that. And of course the 12-point plan for what unifies the people, that was very interesting. Common language, nurturing a common language, knowledge, justice, the rights of people. Really do recommend, inshallah, people have a read through the report. And we'll have you on in the future, inshallah, again. Maybe someone, a few people from Ayan Institute, detailing the work that you do, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair for joining us. I'll let you go now, inshallah. I don't want to, I said it'd be an hour, but I've gone over time. But Jazakallah khairan, Ustad Jahangir Mohammed. Hope to see you soon, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
Carry
Thank
on
you.
your spying on our messenger groups, inshallah.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care, bro. Assalamu
Okay,
alaikum
bro.
wa
Wa
rahmatullahi.
alaikum salam.
And there you have it, folks. Jazakumullah khairan for watching. If you like this podcast, give it a like and a share. Remember to click that notification button and let us know in the comments. What do you think? Agree, disagree? Are you interested in this kind of stuff more? Check out the Ayan Institute as well in more detail. Read the report. Check out their website and any recordings of their launch conference. I'm sure that will be very interesting for anyone watching. Just a final reminder: if you are benefiting from this podcast, please do share the message with your friends and maybe consider donating £5 a month. It's only like 16p. You can do that. I believe in you. So yeah, donate 16p a day to help keep the lights on at Islam 21C. And until next time, I've been your host Salman Butt. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Unscripted.